Have you ever felt like you have one of those nights where it seemed like you were never, ever, ever going to fall asleep? It's the longest night ever. You're laying in your bed, you're just tossing and you're turning, you're like, oh my goodness, how will I ever recover this? How will I get to bed? Am I ever going to go to sleep? And your head is just spinning and you're thinking about stuff and you don't know what to do or what to say. I've had some of those nights. When I was younger, I used to be able to drink coffee or soda like all the way to bedtime. Like bedtime, Dr. Pepper, boom, head on the pillow, out. A couple years ago, I realized those days were over. I was on a Boy Scout camping trip as a leader, and I remember it was one of those crispy, wonderful fall nights, and it's like, man, I think I'd like a cup of coffee. That's a good idea. So I get my little stuff out and make my coffee and my little camping French press and sitting there with the cool air and the fire, talking to the guys, sipping my coffee. Tasted so good. Go to my tent, lay my head on my pillow, and nothing. Just waiting and waiting and waiting to finally fall asleep. And it didn't happen. And I'm just doing the thing where you're tossing and you're turning, you're thinking like, am I doing this wrong? Like, what's going on? Laying on my stomach, laying on my back, laying on my side. Is it camping? Is it what's going on? And you can't, and it hit me at probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, still feeling the jitters. I'm like, I bet it was that coffee. I bet it was that 12 ounces of caffeine I downed right before I laid down on the pillow. And I laid there all night. And I guess I fell asleep eventually, 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's a Boy Scout trip. So, then you got these dudes who are like, it's 5:30 in the morning. Let me make breakfast and make the fire. So they're up again and I have to get up again. It's one of those nights. That was the day that I decided that it's probably best, especially when I'm not sleeping in my own bed, I should just have water before bed. That's probably best. Just like space out the caffeine. Oh man, we've all had those long nights. And that's humorous. But in reality, the long nights often are not caffeine induced. It's a big thing on your mind. You're thinking about the thing. It's a big decision you have to make. You've had some sort of stressful thing at work or a traumatic event, or you found out about something medical or financial that's just like, and you're laying there. And particularly the older we get and the more responsibility we have of our family, our children, our businesses, our communities, you just lay there and your brain doesn't turn off. And we don't help ourselves out much, right? We're scrolling on Facebook until 2 a.m. and then we're like, no, why can't I fall asleep? But the whole thing is like your mind is spinning and going and going. And it's in these moments when you feel the heaviest that you just feel alone. You feel like no one can understand this burden. There's no way I can do this thing that I'm being called to do. How can I carry on? This morning we're going to take a look at what might have been the longest night in history as we look at Jesus in a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. If you know the story, then you know what I'm talking about, and we're going to get there in a second if we don't. But this is a night when Jesus prays before he is arrested and eventually trialed and then executed. And he's got the weight of the world quite literally and spiritually on his shoulders. It's a night full of sorrow, a night full of struggle. Ultimately, it's a night that leads to surrender for Jesus. But we're asking ourselves, what does it mean for us to go through these long nights? And Jesus is going to show us that we don't have to face these things alone. So we are in the final week of this Mountaintops series. We've done 5 sessions of this. Last week we were doing the Serve Together Sunday. But in this whole 6-week period, what we've been doing is going to look at some literal mountaintop moments in the Bible where God meets some of his people and something happens. And what can we learn from that? I mean, we have traveled a great distance. In the very beginning, we were with Abraham on Mount Moriah. We're on Mount Moriah. We're there learning about faith and we're learning about sacrifice, and we had some good lessons there. The next week, we traveled to Mount Sinai, and we see Moses as he goes up to receive the law, and God teaches us this amazing thing, Shema, Shema, listen, listen, or listen and obey. What does it mean for us when God is speaking that we tune in and we do what he says? The next week, we saw Elijah, and we saw him on a roller coaster. Do you remember this? He went to a couple of different mountaintops, and at the lowest of lows, God comes to him, and in the highest of the next high, it's different than he thought, and we learn about the will of God and what it means to submit to that and just keep on going when we feel like we can't go anymore. And the last time we had a lesson before Serve Together Sunday, we saw Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. And you remember we saw him go from glory to the grind. He goes down from this amazing space where he's kind of in his full divine presence, but he goes down and he helps some people. And we find that really the strength to go into the valley and help people at their greatest time of need is like the gift of God from the mountaintop. And so we've been on this journey. Today, we're going to another mountaintop, but this time it's going to be different. We're not at a mountaintop of triumph anymore. We're at a place of decision. We're in a place called the Mount of Olives, in a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane. The word Gethsemane actually is a word that means olive press. Olive press. And this is a moment, either ironically or divinely, that Jesus is going to experience the pressure of a moment and have to see what comes out on the other side. And so if you got your Bible today, I want to encourage you to grab it. We're going to be mostly in Luke chapter 22. So flip over to Luke chapter 22. If you ever need a Bible at our church, we have them in the lobby on the shelf by the door. Always take a Bible if you need one. Borrow it for the service or keep it for keeps if you need one long term. But we'll be in Luke chapter 22. Like a lot of stories that we study about Jesus, it's going to be covered in several different places in the Bible. So we're going to look at the Luke chapter 22 version, but there's also some in, I think, Matthew 26 and another place in the book of Mark that I'll sprinkle in here and there. But Luke gives us a good narrative to follow. And as you turn there, let me just give you a little bit of background on where we're landing. This is the moment Jesus has just had the famous Last Supper. And so if you kind of can think back to your last Easter service you were in on Sunday, we're at this whole moment where Jesus is doing his Passion Week and he's about to be crucified. But Jesus has just had his Last Supper. He's had a little worship service with his friends. It said they got together, they sang some hymns is what it said, and they're worshiping. And then they land in this place on the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's surrounded by these olive trees, and he's about to feel the great crushing pressure of what's ahead of him today. So Luke chapter 22, we're going to pick up at verse 39. Luke 22, 39, let's jump in. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." And then he withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them. He knelt down and prayed. Quick pause there. So this is a common thing for the disciples. They have been camping with him a million times. Over 3 years, they've been hanging out together. It's not their first time spending the night somewhere with Jesus. Not their first time praying with them. It says, as they normally do. They kind of went out and did this thing. And he says, you guys stay here. You pray. Why? Because something big is happening. And I don't want you to fall into temptation. Never miss that just under the surface of the stories in the Bible is this huge spiritual battle that's going on, which is the same thing that's happening in our lives all the time. You pray so that you do not fall into temptation. We're going to see that a couple of them do fall into temptation in just a few hours. This is the same night where Peter's going to deny Jesus, the same night where the rest of them scatter and hide, okay? He's like, this is going to be a hard night. And he says, I'm going to go over here, just a stone's throw away. It's like not quite in earshot, but you could probably see him, right? Just right over there. You pray. As Jesus is facing his coming betrayal, he asked him to pray. You remember the last thing that happened at the dinner they just had? One of the guys, Judas, says, I'm going to go betray you. Or Jesus sends him out. Go and do the thing that you're going to do. Jesus has just explained to them, I'm going to give my life. I'm about to die. They're like, no way, man. Why would you? What? And then Judas goes off. So the weight of all this thing is sitting on him, and it is here. The moment that Jesus came to earth to be here for is here. I've had the great pleasure of standing in a back room with a young man at a wedding venue just before I officiate his wedding. It's a pretty cool, in fact, several of you in this room have been in that room with me or off to the side with me. And it's a really neat moment. Several times I've seen this where this dude is standing there. It kind of finally clicks like, this is it. Like, this is it. The thing I've been waiting for, the thing I've been excited about, anxious about, nervous about, happy about for months, maybe years. I've been waiting and waiting. This is it. Like, in just a few minutes, I'm about to be married. And to see this moment with these guys so many times is so cool. It's so cool. I'm like, and this is almost always what I say. I say, just take it in. And you guys, you didn't listen. You don't remember it. You don't remember any of it because it's such a rush. But like, just take it in. Now, that's an exciting example of this it's here moment, okay? Jesus is facing a different it's here moment. The thing he came to do, to sacrifice his spiritual self for the sin of mankind, it's here. And so he goes up to this place to pray, and he says to his best friends, man, I'm going to pray, and I'm just going to step over here out of earshot. I'm going to do some praying of my own. And he begins to pray. And it's not just like a calm, peaceful, dear God, thank you for my food. Give me a good night's sleep prayer. Like, this is a bloody knuckles spiritual battle prayer. In one of the other verses, this is, it's not going to be on the screen, but Matthew 26:38, in describing it, he tells it to his boys. He says, listen, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. We exaggerate a lot, and we're like, oh, I'm so hungry I could die. Those shoes are so cute I could die. I have a 15-year-old daughter. You know, we get so, but like, he's like, I am so broken right now. I'm in sorrow to the point of death, is what he says. And that's about to come true. This is no small sorrow. He's crushed under the weight of the sin of the world. He knows what's coming, and the thought of it just brings him to his knees. This night is about to be long for Jesus. It's heavy, it's full of pain. And what I love about this moment is just how honest Jesus is. We're going to see. He doesn't pretend that he's stronger when he feels weak. He doesn't try to push him through it without acknowledging it. Isn't that how we cope with hard things sometimes? Just ignore it. Sometimes we feel like we have to keep it all together. Like we can't admit to God or anybody else that something's hard and overwhelming. Jesus himself is going to do just that, and we're going to see that. So we're going to keep reading verse 42. Luke chapter 22, verse 42. He prays what might be the most honest prayer ever. He says, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. And I just want to leave that up there for a minute. He's broken. It's hurting. He doesn't want to do it anymore. Let's talk about this cup. What is the cup? The cup is a theme that shows up through the Bible a few times in some prophets and in some psalms and things like that. The cup is often like a symbol of judgment or suffering. Like this is a big thing that you're facing. It's like this ultimate moment. It's my cup. And so for Jesus, this cup represents the wrath of God is maybe one way of looking at it. Like don't miss this, guys. This is huge. This moment is about you. This moment is about me. Our sin has consequences. And on the very base level, the consequences of our sin is the wrath of God. God never wavers in this idea of his wrath towards sin. We as modern Christians, we like the happy Jesus with the blue eyes and the blonde hair. Like, right? We've got this mentality of Jesus like he would never be mad. He's just a real nice guy. No, he has a holy righteousness. He's got a presence that cannot be in the midst of sinfulness and brokenness. Now, he can go into it just like Jesus is doing here. He can come into your lives and he can wrap his arms around you. But he has no desire to be with that filth. And as we have sin in our life, like what we're calling on is the wrath of God because it's like he said, I have this presence, this holiness, this righteousness, and your sin is just scratching at my eyeballs. Like I hate it. And I want to do anything to get this sin out of my presence. And in this moment, Jesus is aware that the whole purpose of the sacrifice, the whole purpose of the crucifixion, the whole purpose of him being on earth at this time is to actually, and I don't know how this works, I can't see behind the veil to understand it, but this is consistent throughout Scripture, that God is going to allow Jesus to bear the weight of all the wrath for all the sins of all of humanity. When you were a kid and you felt guilty for stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar, man, multiply that times bajillions. And that's what Jesus is facing here. He's like, is this, have we looked at this real close, Father? Is there another way? Because in my holiness and my righteous state, I just don't want to do it. You got to remember, Jesus is fully God. He is. And we're going to see it in his resurrection in just a few scenes. But he allows himself to be fully human because that's kind of the whole deal. He wanted to come down and show us a way. How can you relate to humans if he can't show us that he's been there? And so right here we have to ask a really important theological question. It's big. It's big. We're diving into something deep here. Why does Jesus ask to avoid the cross? I mean, think about it. Haven't there been thousands of martyrs for Christianity throughout history? People that have given their life for Jesus? Like I'm speculating. How dare Jesus, the founder of this faith, have an ounce of hesitation? How dare he? Right? I mean, that's a good question to ask. We should ask these healthy questions of the Bible. I think there's a big answer to that. I think it's not at all that Jesus is scared or that he's a coward. By the way, cowardice has nothing to do with it. Bravery and courage has to do with your actions, not your feelings. In fact, the more scared you are, the more intimidated you are, the more courageous you are if you follow through with it. And we know from the story what Jesus does, right? He follows through with this. But also, this is apples and oranges, okay? Jesus is not, I want to quote from one of my favorite scholars. This is Dr. Mark Moore from his commentary on the life of Christ. He says, martyrs die for a cause. Martyrs die for a cause. You know that? That's what a martyr is. Jesus is about to die for the sins of the world. He becomes sin on the cross. and took in his own body the sin of the world. What troubled Jesus was not the physical torture of a martyr, but the spiritual torment of the God-man, that's Jesus, experiencing for the first time both the guilt of humanity and separation from the Father. To have his very essence ripped in half. He's fully God. How can he even do this? And so what he's about to do is so monumental. There's no way that we could ever comprehend how far Jesus had to stoop to be in this moment. Philippians chapter 2 says that he just released his grip on being God. He was, in essence, fully God, but considered he could empty himself and make himself nothing and take it on the likeness of a human and even the likeness of a servant, even to the point of death. Like, how far has he continued to stoop to this very moment? 2 Corinthians 5:21 says that God made him who had no sin to become sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. He's setting up this amazing trade. And so, yeah, the cup is heavy. And he's like, hey, look, Father, let's have a little divine counsel. Have we exhausted every option here? The human side of Jesus is curious. The divine side of Jesus is curious. But of course we know Jesus is going to go through with it. There's not another way. But here's a thought. This is encouraging to me. If Jesus struggles in this moment with surrender, be it ever so briefly, then it's okay for you to struggle too. It's really hard to let go of myself and give it over to God. Jesus struggles with it. We struggle with it. And there are moments in our life when we've been given a cup that just feels unbearable. What can I do with this? I don't have the strength. I don't have the skills. I don't have the history. I don't have the resources to carry this cup. And maybe for you, it's a medical thing. It's a diagnosis that you receive. And you're like, what? I didn't see this coming. This is your cup. Maybe it's a financial thing. You get this bill and it's just like punch you in the gut. That's going to wipe us out. It's a relational thing. You didn't see it coming. You thought things were fine and then it just falls apart. This is the cup. And we're handed this cup. It's like all of us have one. Sometimes you're like, I'm like a waiter with a tray full of cups, right? You know, it's just, there's a weight. And so what's your cup? You know, there's a question to chew on. What is your cup? What is it that you're wrestling with? What are the things that you're holding on to that you just wish someone else could take? Is there another way? That's Jesus' moment, but I want to point out, we sat in that theological debate for just a second, but I want to point out, that's a very quick verse. Let's go back to the verse before that, just before the slide. He says, take this cup from me, but he doesn't stop there. He says, but not my will, but yours be done. What a stud. That's a hard prayer to pray. And that's the moment of surrender. Surrender is the moment when we stop wrestling for control and we start trusting God, that his plan is better than ours, even when it doesn't make any sense to us. And so what we see from Jesus is that surrender is not about, surrender is about strength, not weakness. The surrender moment shows how strong you are. It takes strength to say, God, I don't know if I can do this, but I trust you, and I trust that you know what you're doing, and I trust that your will is good, even when I don't know what to do. This is a seriously long night, and Jesus is sitting in it. So that's what's happening with Jesus in the story. And that's kind of it, okay? I mean, like that, it's it, right? But this is his whole night. He's just wrestling through this thought. But do you remember he's not alone on this mountain? He came up with his disciples. Let's check in on them. How are they doing? He said, you guys go over there, you pray, and I'm going to be over here. I'm going to pray, and you just keep watch for me because just have sorrow to the point of death. And so Jesus gets up from praying, and he looks over and he walks to his disciples, and what does he find them doing? You guys know it? They're sleeping. They're taking a nap. Now, I don't want to beat them up too much because I've been there, okay? It's just like, oh, I hope you worked that out, right? And then you're over here, you're sleeping. Verse 45, when he rose from his prayer, he went back to the disciples, and he found them asleep. And I can appreciate this. They were exhausted from sorrow. You ever cry your eyes out to the point where you just can't keep going? Like they've just sat there and they just heard that their leader, the one that they have now believed is the Messiah, is going to die. Judas is out there doing who knows what, Judas, I can't believe this. Maybe they're exhausted by sorrow because of Judas. I don't know. But Jesus is a little shocked that they're asleep. He's like, well, I just explained to you what's going on, man. I just had one thing for you to do. Could you just pray? In Matthew 26, it says, you guys, you couldn't stay awake for 1 hour? I love that line. You couldn't stay awake for 1 hour? We'll wake up and pray so that you don't fall into temptation. He says it again, and then he goes back, and this is a place where we get one of Jesus' greatest teachings, actually, also in Matthew 26, so it's not on the screen, but this is the secondary account of this. This is where he says, you know what, I get it, because the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Even Jesus in his darkest night gives some of the best zingers ever. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Anybody ever been there? I don't need to do this, but I'm going to. And again, and it destroyed my life, and it destroyed my career, and it destroyed my marriage, and it destroyed my reputation, but it was kind of fun. I mean, I don't know why, but that's just our nature. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Luke, the one that we're reading here, he shortens it. It's a pretty short account, but in Matthew, we see some more details. It turns out that Jesus, he goes over, he wakes them up. Come on, guys, can you stay for 1 hour? He goes back and he prays again. And then he comes back again, and what are they doing again? Tell me. They're sleeping again. Second time. I love this second time. He's like, why are you sleeping? And their answer is, because our eyes were heavy. I mean, you're driving home. It's late. It's that last 20 minutes, and you really should just pull over. I mean, is it worth dying to make it home tonight? Yes. You know, you got the windows down, the music up, families are back asleep in the car asleep. Like, what are you all asleep for? Jerks? You know, you're just driving. You've been there, and the guys are like, my eyes were heavy. Like, the body is weak. Jesus understands, but he goes back and he prays again, comes back a third time. Guys, it says this time they were actually verse 45, and this is Matthew 26. Then he returned. Are you still sleeping and resting? I love that and resting because I watch football every time I can, and often my wife would be like, you sleep? I'm like, no, it's resting my eyes, right? So I think that's what's happening here for some of them. Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed to the hands of sinners. Rise and go. Here comes my betrayer. And the long night has come to an end, and here comes Judas walking up the path with some soldiers, and it's about to be just a slippery slope to the crucifixion from here. But let's talk about those disciples. Because I'm not Jesus and neither are you, and it's hard to even relate to that. I mean, he's facing stuff that we could never relate. But these guys are going through a hard time too. And they don't have the strength even just to pray. Here's the truth. Sometimes the long nights in our lives expose our weakness. We want to stay strong, but we can't. Just the cup is too heavy, or pick your metaphor, it's just I can't. The disciples, they want to be there for Jesus. Of course they do. He's their best friend. He's their leader. But their bodies give up. And we do the same thing. I think that's one of the biggest curses of addiction. The chemistry in your brain, it's like almost impossible to get control of it by yourself. You have to get help. And so for you, it's like maybe you're metaphorically or literally falling asleep while you're praying. But what does that mean? I mean, that's like I'm giving up when I should be holding on, or I'm not trusting when I should be trusting, or I'm not faithful when I should be faithful. To pick your cup, pick your struggle, but like that's the reality. That's the truth. The truth is that the long nights expose our weakness. But with that truth comes a grace. Here's the grace. Even in our failure, even in our sleepiness, Jesus doesn't condemn these guys. Jesus continues on his mission. And this is not to over-allegorize what I believe is a true story, but I think there's a metaphor here that really plays throughout Scripture. Maybe what you need to hear is that even when you fail to stay awake, God is still working in the darkness. I can't carry this cup anymore. What's happening in the background? God's like, bro, I got you. I got you. Just hang on, man. Just do the best you can. Help is coming. Your small group friends are on the way. Your church family's on the way. I remember when we were in the midst of Hurricane Florence here, and I can only hope for the people who are trying to do leadership there in all the broken areas in the western part of our state and other areas. But I wish they could hear help is on the way. It's going to be a long road, a long night. Help is on the way. God is working in the background. Even when I can't keep my eyes open because they're heavy, God doesn't stop working. Jesus prayed through the night. I hope that can bring you some hope right now. some peace and some knowledge of the grace of what God does for us. And that's the story for today. Now, spoiler, it turns out really good. But before it gets really good, it gets worse. Jesus is arrested. According to their very own laws, it's a whack trial. Middle of the night, they call in all kinds of liars and false witnesses, and they accuse him without fair due process, and he ends up. Now, this was all within God's will. That's what he came to do. But man, it was all bogus too. His closest friends, these guys who couldn't keep their eyes open, still with sleepy boogers in their eyes, they're running away, hiding in the shadows. The strongest loudmouth of them all, Peter, standing there, and a little girl comes up and is like, "Hey, aren't you that guy that follows that Jesus guy that just got arrested?" And he's like, I'll tell you, I don't know that guy. And he runs. Like, the night gets darker and longer for all of them. But on the other side of it, even though Jesus dies, guys, he doesn't stay dead. The glory and the wonderful story of the Christian faith is that God came to earth and he gave his life, but he rose from the dead, defeating death, throwing down on anything that keeps us separated from God. But the goal of this series is to learn about the mountaintop. What happens there and what can we learn in the valley? And I just asked the question, how do we face our longest nights? You're going through one right now, many of you, or you've got one ahead. I think we all have Gethsemane moments. Remember what Gethsemane means? It means an olive press or a press of some kind. We use so much olive oil at my house. We love it. I feel like 60% of our recipes start with put a pan on the stove and put some olive oil in it. And then be like, what are we eating? Starts with olive oil. Like, we run through it. Do you know how olive oil is made? I didn't. I kind of had an idea, but I Googled it. It's pretty cool. I mean, you pick olives, boop, boop, boop. You put them in a big press, and you just squish them. You squish the mess out of them. And you're just getting the liquid out of them. You squish it down to like a paste, okay? And then you take that paste and you put it in another press or the same press. You press them again. And then in the second press, basically you're squeezing out all of the fluid. And basically all that's left, it's pits and all, is oil and water. Oil and water separate, olive oil. That's probably a lot more complicated than that. But that's basically... Olive oil comes from the same place that diamonds come from. Immense pressure, right? It takes this immense pressure to pull out this goodness. And Jesus finds himself in a place called the olive press, surrounded by olives, and he's under this immense pressure. And I think we have these olive press Gethsemane moments all the time. Time when we face decisions where the question is either I hold on or I let go. I either trust God or I trust in me. I either keep my faith or I lose my faith. And we all have these cups in those moments that we're forced to drink or to hold or whatever the metaphor is. And those nights feel so long because under the pressure, it's like, is this ever going to end? And you're tossing and turning spiritually. And what do I even do with this? But thanks be to God that through Jesus, there is hope. Guys, the longest nights that you face, you are not alone. Jesus has been there. He knows the weight of sorrow. He knows the struggle to surrender. And he promises that he will be with us in the garden. He will be with us in the press. And you need to hear that right now because if you're under the press right now, you need to know you're not alone. It's hard to hear that. It's hard to hear that because you're like, all you can do is survive right now. But you're not alone. And so what I want to do to wrap up this whole series, just two things. Two things I want to do. I want to ask a question and I want to give a challenge. And we're done. We did 5 weeks of Mountaintops, and I hope it was good for you. It was good for me. Two things. First thing, a question. The question is this: what is your cup? That might take some thinking, or you might be like, ding, I know. What is your cup? What is the thing you're holding on to that you need to surrender? The thing you need to let go of. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it was a dream that was crushed. You know how to salvage it. Maybe it's a relationship that fell apart. I don't know. What is it? I talked about medical stuff earlier, financial stuff earlier. What is it? What is the cup? It might be short term. It might be long term. And so in your mind right now, you don't have to say this out loud, but in your mind, say it. Call it out. Say it. What's the cup? Tell yourself. You got to know, because if you don't know, you're not going to be able to surrender it. What is it? And if you got a list, you're holding that waiter tray full of cups, and then just pick one, okay? Just pick one. It's hard to do more than one at a time. Pick one, the one that you think you can deal with the easiest or whatever. What is the cup? and surrender it to the Father. That's the hard part, right? What is your cup? Identify. Okay. Let me pause right here in this question, because you might be in this room right now and you're like, I didn't sign up for this. What I mean is, you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, or you're wrestling with your faith, and you're like, okay, you're talking about like this, like I care what Jesus did. Like I care about the cross, like I care about the resurrection. And you're here, and I'm so glad that you're here. And I hope this can be a safe place. You don't have to check your baggage at the door. You can come just like you are with all the brokenness and all the past. We've all got it, okay? But you might be in the seat right now going like, man, it's a bunch of hogwash, man. Okay, fair. Because unless you've lived through it, unless you've been through it for years, it's hard to hear what I'm saying right now. But can I encourage you to do one thing? Maybe you're not even ready to name your cup. I want you to know that with God, it's just about one step at a time. So maybe for you, it's just like, what's the one step of faith I can take? Literally just coming back next week would be a good one. Coming to the park for chili tonight. You like chili, you like brownies. Oh, you don't like either one of those? You like hanging out with people? You don't like that either? Okay, well, maybe find another thing to do. Maybe it's signing up for a small group. One step, one thing you can do is like, God, I don't even know what you do and how you work, but I'm willing to take a step, okay? So maybe that's your thing. But what's your cup? That's the question. And now the challenge. And we can go ahead and put the challenge on the screen. Here's the challenge. This week, and you can keep this for the rest of your life, actually. Take time every day to think about that cup that you're holding, and then practice praying the prayer of Jesus. I love that Jesus gives us so many great lessons. Not my will, but yours be done. That's the prayer. I don't know how I'm going to raise these ridiculous kids anymore. I don't know what to do. I can't get them to X, Y, and Z, behave or do what I've told them to do or do better in school, or they're struggling with a fear or a pain or a sickness that I have no control over. What can you do? The best you can do is call that cup out and say, not my wills, but yours be done. Help me to trust you, God. You got this financial situation. You don't know how you're going to take a step forward. Lord, help me find your will in this, not my will. My will is that I hit a lottery and I can just pay off all my bills and then I'll be just filthy rich. That's my will. God's will might be, hey, actually you should start by doing my thing. Be generous first. Make sacrifice first. You could pick all the different things, but you just, with each one, you lay it down and you say, not my will, but yours be done. And I'll tell you, the prayers is one thing. Another thing, though, is maybe talking out with some friends, some believers that are friends. It's like, what does it mean to find God's will in this? That's really what small groups can be good for. Like, I've been trying to pray for God's will in this, but I don't know what it is. It's kind of the thing about his will. Like, we don't always know what it is. But the key is surrender. Like, I'm willing to let go. I'm willing to give you this cup. And a final thought. The long night doesn't last forever. If you've lived much life, you understand, even when it gets really hard, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, especially, particularly, and sometimes exclusively, if you know Jesus. Because he offers hope beyond all of this world. He promises us healing and resurrection now, abundant life now. That's the promise of living for Jesus. And he promises us life eternal, resurrection, spiritual renewal, being in the presence of God and the life beyond this. So we get to build his kingdom and live in it now under his guidance and protection, and we get to live in it under his guidance and protection later. Hope is coming. But in the meantime, when you're in the valley, surrender the cup. Can I pray for us today?